Welcome to Conversations with Tom Shorkey. Conversations explores the past, the present, and the future of the communities in which we live through the eyes of interesting individuals. Now let's join our host, Tom Shorkey.
Welcome to Conversations. I'm your host for today's program, Tom Shorkey. With me today is a very recognizable figure throughout the Blue Water area, especially the East China School District, having spent time both the Marine City and the St. Clair ends of the school district. With me today is our guest, Mike Alley. Welcome, Mike, to Conversations.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, Mike, we cover a lot of things on Conversations, and we'll probably talk about your career a little bit, but we also like to get a little background, and especially if somebody grew up in the neighborhood or in our communities. Tell me a little bit about Michael Alley growing up in St. Clair, Michigan.
Well, I grew up, as you mentioned, in St. Clair. Spent my whole life here. Grew up in a little house just south of the old state police post, which if you're probably older than or younger than 40, you have no idea what I'm talking about. On Oakland, real close to Clutcha Little League Park. When I was about 10, we moved to the house on corner of Kearney and Vine, which I'm sure most people know is the house that has the pool inside the pole barn. The pole barn was not there when I grew up. Went to Eddy Elementary, went to the old St. Clair Middle School on 6th Street, St. Clair High School, graduated from St. Clair High School, and then went on to college, and here I am.
All right, I need to clear up one thing.
Okay.
Actually, two things. What we now have to say, instead of by the old St. Clair State Police Post, because nobody knows what we have to refer to Angler Ride,
right?
Because at least it gets us in the ballpark. But the other thing we need to clear up, and this is just a maybe it's a urban myth or something, but you had a pool in your backyard when you were on the corner of Vine and Kearney.
Correct.
And all of a sudden, a pole barn went up over the pool, and we heard that went up because your dad was tired of getting the leaves out of the pool.
That was exactly the reason.
Is that right?
Yeah, when my brother and I were there, we were in charge of cleaning the pool, and when we went off to college, Dad did not want to have to clean the pool anymore. Plus, he realistically, he saw that it would add, a few months on each end of being able to use the pool, but that cleaning the pool was the major reason that pole barn went up.
All right. St. Clair High grad.
Correct.
Nice basketball team there in the mid-'70s, class of 77 or
Correct.
So, somewhere along that line. Got time to select college. What did you do?
Well, funny thing is, I did play basketball in high school. It did okay. Had some offers from some small schools to go play, the Siena Heights, the Northwoods, the Adrians, schools like that, Hillsdale. But my future wife, Karen, was a year behind me in school. So I decided to go to SC4 to play basketball so I could, stay near her, young love and all that. And I committed to St. Clair County Community College for 2 years. As soon as she graduated, she took off for Central Michigan, left me at SC4 for another year. But after SC4 2 years, I went on to Central.
And everything kind of worked out along the way because you and Karen have how many grandchildren?
We have eight grandchildren. 3 sons, 8 grandkids. Very, very lucky.
And that's a great story. Okay, you went to SC4. What did you think you were going to be for a career? Did you always have teaching in mind, or?
Well, actually, no. The people that know me know that my mom taught 3rd grade for at least 150 years. My dad taught industrial arts and was assistant principal at St. Clair High School and then principal of Bell River down in Marine City. So education I knew was out there, but thanks to Bill Buell and Vic Ruley, in my St. Clair High School days, they prepared me well in math. I was going to go to be an engineer. After my first year at SC4, at least in my head, at the time, engineering was a very numbers-based, non-personal career. And I'm wired to be more of a personable guy. And so after 1 year, I said, I'm going to give this education thing a shot. So I changed my major from engineering to education, and then the rest is history, as they say.
So you went to Central, education major, math major.
Math major, yep.
Where was the first job out of the blocks out of Mount Pleasant then?
The funny thing is the first job offer came from Midland Dow, which I did not apply for. They called me, said they're looking for math majors. And I said, well, I have no experience at all or wanting to go in that direction. He said, don't worry, we'll train you. And I said, I'm going to give this teaching thing a chance. So I applied in a couple places. The first place I applied, the funny thing is, was Coleman, which is just north of Mount Pleasant.
I know where it is.
Interviewed. The principal liked me, said, Mike, we want to hire you as a science teacher. I said, well, I'm not a science major. He says, don't worry, you can do it. I said, well, I probably shouldn't. And my next interview was down in a little town called Bath, which is just north of Lansing. Interviewed there as a math, PE, computer teacher. It's got a little less than 300 kids in high school, so you ended up teaching quite a number of things. Got hired there and really enjoyed my experience in Bath.
Now, how many years in Bath?
It was 4.5, maybe 5.5, because partway through the year in November, opening came at East China at Marine City Middle School. And Karen and I knew our long-range plans was to raise a family in this area. We're both from St. Clair. We love this area. Our families was in the area, so we wanted to raise our kids here. So when opening came up at Marine City Middle School, applied for it, got it, and we moved everyone back here.
Sounds good. Now Bath is an infamous little school district because was it back in the 1920s?
Late 20s, early 30s, I believe.
Late 20s, early 30s, and the superintendent was off his rocker or whatever?
No, it was a board member.
Oh, it was a board member.
Board member. Board member was off his rocker, was putting it lightly. Asked the superintendent, he wanted to go on a tour of the building, tour of the high school, had set up some explosive devices, got the superintendent in there and blew things up.
Blew the school up,
yeah.
Number of children and superintendent.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Terrible story.
Yep.
Just for our audience at home, we like to bring a little history of the state of Michigan to the program once in a while. Mike, most everybody knows you over the last bunch of years as principal at St. Clair Middle School.
Yep.
But things may be changing. What's going on with Mike Alley?
Well, big change. I'm retiring from St. Clair Middle School as the principal. So it's a big step. Could not thank the people enough, the parents, the students, the community, for my years at St. Clair Middle School, but going in a different direction.
Okay, so you were kind of wrapping up, what, 35, 6, 7? How many years in education?
Started in 81.
Pardon me?
Started in 81.
Started in 81.
Yep.
Well, I'll let the math major do the math, but so for our audience at home, if you had not heard this previously to this air showing, Mike is retiring from the East China School District. We're going to talk a little bit about the next chapter in his life, but when you came to East China as in November of whenever that was to become a math teacher at Marine City Middle School, since then and through this year, you've worn many hats.
Yes, sir.
Give the audience a little flavor for some of the different jobs you've had in this district.
Well, like any young teacher, when you first start off, one of the most important things you can do is to get involved with as many different activities as you can. So when I first came to East China, Marine City Middle School, one of the first people I met was Darryl Walker, who was the varsity basketball coach at the time, was in need of a JV basketball coach. So Darryl came to me, needed some help. I said, absolutely, basketball is one of my loves. I would absolutely love getting involved with the program, give me a chance to meet the kids, they can meet me. So I coached JV basketball, I coached JV softball under Marv Osterlin. A few years in, became the varsity girls basketball coach at Marine City High School. Did that for 5, 6, 7 years or whatever that was. thoroughly enjoyed that, enjoyed the girls. Taught driver's ed for, goodness, it must have been 15 years during the summer. Then I taught summer school. After Marine City Middle School, which I was there for 3 or 4 years, I believe, there's an opening at Marine City High School, so I moved to Marine City High School, was there for a few years.
Teaching math?
Teaching math and computers. The principal, Bob Rood, and our assistant principal, Shannon Griffin. Shannon took a different job halfway through the year. Bob asked me if I would be the interim at the time. I said, absolutely, I'll give it a shot. I had no desire at all of going into administration, which is another story, because my dad was assistant principal at St. Clair High School when I went through, so I didn't want any part of that.
I understand that.
Yep, that was back when you could paddle kids. But then after half a year at Marine City High School as assistant principal, I loved it, absolutely loved it. Applied for the job, got the job there. I think I was assistant principal for 3 years, and then the job at Marine City Middle School opened up as a principal. I applied and got that position, was there for 4 years, and then the job at St. Clair Middle School opened up, and I was moved up to St. Clair Middle School.
And happily ever after at St. Clair Middle School.
Correct.
No, and you did acknowledge the parents and students, but St. Clair Middle had tremendous reputation for academics, extracurricular activities while you were there. So.
You know, and luckily enough, every place I've been has been that way. You know, I would not trade Marine City Middle School, Marine City High School for anything. Those people were absolutely great to me, absolutely great.
Now, when you got, you were educated to be a teacher, late 70s, early 80s, started off in Bath, and now you see how education and instruction has evolved to what you've experienced the last couple of years. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen?
Well, one of the big changes from when I first started in education, there was a lot of hands-on jobs available. You know, kids would go through Bath High School or Marine City High School, and they would get a job, you know, in Lansing with the Pontiac plant, or, you know, work for Ford's, or here go work at Diamond Crystal or the Edison. And those jobs were out there, where now those jobs just aren't there. And we're starting to swing back a little bit to where we're doing more hands-on thing, but we used to focus on a lot of voc ed, a lot of industrial arts, you know, things of that nature, where now, you know, our curriculum has gotten so tight where a lot of the electives are being squeezed out, which is a shame. But that's, you know, that's just the nature of education, where now we have the Common Core, the stakes seem to be quite a bit higher. You talk to any staff about doing something extra, something that we used to consider fun, and they would say, I don't have time. You know, I have this much material that I have to get done in this amount of time, you know, and we have to, you know, I don't have time to do some of the extras, which is a shame, but, you know, it's the world we live in.
What, if you were back up at Central Michigan tomorrow, and there was a cluster of 5 or 6 young people that were going into teaching, what would your advice be for those folks?
I guess my advice would be the same as my advice would have been 30 years ago. Get involved, get to know your kids, make sure that you have a love for what you're going to be doing. You're not going to get rich doing this. For the people that say, oh, you get summers off and you get all the year done at 3:30, that's just not the case. Last summer was the first summer I've ever had off. Last summer was the first summer I didn't do driver's training or summer school. And many of the young teachers, most of the young teachers are that way. Most people going into teaching understand, you know, it's a 24/7 job. You're going to be up late at night doing lesson plans, you know, staying after school to help students, getting there early to help students, you know, and
taking classes,
renewing certification, you know. So you make sure that your heart is in this, because it is not an easy job. It it is one of the toughest jobs, but one of the most rewarding jobs there is in education. So you have to make sure that you're ready to jump in the deep end.
Who's been an influence to you as you've worked your way through this life of yours?
Well, I mentioned Vic Ruley and Bill Buell in high school. They were a big influence on me. Every step along the way, I was very lucky to have mentors that would help me out and point me in the right direction. Reggie Dixon hired me in Bath. Of course, Walt Parsons hired me at Marine City Middle School. Bob Rood has been excellent, and to this day, I still consider him a mentor. Of course, my parents pointed me in the right direction, was always there to help me out. My wife, Karen, was always there to pick me up when I was feeling down. So I've been very, very lucky every place I've been.
Well, we better talk about Karen just for a minute.
Yep.
Here. She beat you to the punch. She
Correct.
retired last year after, 30-some years?
Correct.
Mainly kindergarten teacher, was that?
Kindergarten, first grade, yep.
Well, she's got a lot to do, as you will find too, as you move forward. Your 3 boys, 2 out of the 3 live
in St. Clair.
In St. Clair.
The 2 married ones with the grandkids all live in St. Clair. We're very lucky.
Well, yes, you are. What are your boys doing?
Well, my oldest son, David, is a federal agent, works for Homeland Security. My middle son, Matthew, works for MASSP, the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals. He's in charge of all their student councils and honor society. And so he does a very good job with that. And my youngest son, Michael, works for Quicken and lives down in Detroit.
Great.
Yeah.
You've dealt with a lot of students, middle
Yes.
school, high school. You've dealt with a lot of parents in all of your jobs. If you could just get a group of parents together that maybe had middle school age kids, is there some knowledge you would like to share with parents about dealing with kids from 13 to 18 years old?
Well, yes. And one of the toughest things to explain to a new parent, what I mean by new parent when they have their oldest child is coming through, is there's going to be bumps in the road. Good kids make poor choices sometimes. Mm-hmm. And until you've gone through this, and Tom, I know you never did because your kids never made any mistakes.
Absolutely.
But
not.
until you've gone through this, it's hard to explain that to someone, and it's not a reflection on you. I mean, it's just normal.
Yeah.
So as you're getting ready, when you hit that first bump in the road with your oldest, and you want to just choke the life out of them, take a step back. It's okay.
Yeah.
Good kids make poor choices. They learn from it. They move on. From a school standpoint, and I've had this conversation with hundreds of parents, kids are much more worried about what their parents are going to think about them than any discipline I can give them. So when they make a mistake, they make a poor choice, and here's a great example. I was in middle school. Ray Randall was teaching science class, and I've told this 1,000 times to parents. I was being a knucklehead in class. He said, I can call your dad or give you the paddle. And I did not hesitate. I said, hit me twice. Do not call my dad.
Yeah.
And most parents feel that way, most kids feel that way. They do not want their parents to think any less of them. So it's, kids are kids. From 30 years ago till this past year, kids are kids.
What, in your illustrious career, is there anything that you would do a little differently? Any do-over in your...
It's funny, when you get to be my age, you start to reflect on a lot of things and the direction your life took you in the different paths. And you start thinking about, if I would have done this, or if I would have taken that job at Midland Dow, or if I would have gotten to administration earlier. But then, if you really think about it, any change you make, there's a ripple effect, and you wouldn't have the experiences you have now. So if I would have done any of those things, Midland Dow I wouldn't have done. But if I would have gotten into administration sooner, if I would have taken, a job outside the district in central office level, then I would have missed out on all the relationships I was able to build, from that point forward, and I wouldn't change anything.
Kind of like Doc Brown telling Marty McFly, don't be altering anything, because you change one thing, it's going to change
Correct.
everything.
Yes.
That's good. What, you and Karen made that decision, you want to get back over to this part of the Blue Water area to raise your family. You know, a lot of people will come to St. Clair, Marine City for the festivals, the plays in Marine City, the boat races up here, art fair. But could you give a good 30-second commercial on why people should think about relocating here, putting their kids in our schools, and living in our communities? What would you tell people?
Well, I think the one thing that a lot of people try to sell the area on is the river. You know, we have that. A lot of us take it for granted. But that's not the reason we move back. We move back for the people. The people here have a legitimate love for the community. And until you live away from here, you might not really get that. I was part of MASSP and the board of directors, so I got to talk to a lot of principals, got to visit different schools, and that's just not the case in a lot of places. You know, our schools are community schools. You know, people want to go to the sporting events. People want to go to the plays, to the performances. You know, the Little League parks. You know, they support their kids. You know, they want what's best for their kids. And again, I don't want to say we take it for granted, because we just live it. Where a lot of places, that's just not the case. And that's how we wanted to raise our kids.
Sounds great. Now, as we mentioned earlier in our conversation, you've just wrapped up your education career as the principal of St. Clair Middle School. There's probably another chapter to be written. What's it going to be for you?
Well, you know, being in education since '81, I knew the light was getting bright. And you start to look for different things you can do, you know, after education. You know, it's to the point, you know, God willing, we're going to live to be 80 years old. So just to retire and do nothing, just, A, would be boring, and B, I'm just not wired that way. I was approached right before school got out by Edward Jones to be a financial advisor. And I said, I don't know. And then after talking to them, you know, I have a math background, I'm a people person, you know, it just became more and more interesting to the point where, you know, that sounds like a great second career for me. I'm able to help people, talk to people. I'm very excited about it, so I'm going to be a financial advisor for Edward Jones.
Great. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Well, you know, as you say, you've got there's a lot of living left to do, and
Yes.
80 or 90, but let's pick 90. We're going to redo the show,
Okay.
because I definitely will be here then. And when you turn
Well, you're
90,
close to 90 now.
Hey, careful. When we sit down with the big cake that says, "Happy birthday, Mike, you're 90 or 80 or whatever," what does Mike Alley want to be remembered for?
Well, hopefully, you know, all of us are remembered for making a difference. You know, and that's what's great about education. And I know you experience this, that I have past students will stop by the house just to say hi, to introduce me to their spouse, their kids. You know, I'll be out mowing the grass and some car will pull up, and of course, 9 times out of 10, I don't recognize them, you know, because they're older now. But yeah, Mr. Alley, how you doing? I'm blah, blah. And, you know, you had me in math class, or you were my assistant principal, or you were my principal, this is my wife, this is my kid. You know, or we can be walking downtown at the boat races, or whatever the case is. And, you know, just people to remember you and have good thoughts about you.
Oh, great. Thanks for being here today, Mike. And for our audience at home, I hope you learned a little bit more about our recently retired St. Clair Middle School principal. Mike's been part of this community, grew up here, was away with his career for 5 or 6 years, chose to come back to the Blue Water area to raise his sons, and now all the grandchildren are in the neighborhood. So on behalf of watchctv.org, I'd like to thank Mike for being here. And if you at home have somebody that you think would be an interesting guest on our program, go to watchctv.org and leave us a message. This is Tom Shorkey. Glad to be your host today, and thanks, Mike, for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
You've been watching Conversations with Tom Shorkey. Conversations explores the past, the present, and the future of the communities in which we live through the eyes of interesting individuals. If you have an idea for a future conversation, please contact us at www.watchctv.org. Thanks for watching Conversations with Tom Shorkey.